In a city ruled by silence and violence, Genevieve Parker thought she was invisible. She was wrong. Running from a past that left her black and blue, she stumbled into the one place safer and deadlier than the streets, the Onyx Room, the private sanctuary of Lorenzo Moretti. She didn't know who he was. She only knew she was about to collapse. But when the most feared man in the city catches you, he doesn't just let you go, especially when he sees the marks on your skin. Watch closely, because this isn't a fairy tale. This is what happens when a broken girl falls at the feet of a monster who decides to become her shield. The air inside the Onyx Room smelled of expensive Scotch-aged leather and fear. It was a subtle scent, the fear buried under the heavy perfume of the elite who frequented the most exclusive club in Chicago. But Lorenzo Moretti could smell it. He sat in the shadowed corner booth, his back to the velvet-lined wall, watching the room with eyes that resembled chipped flint. He wasn't looking for trouble tonight. He was looking for a ghost, a leak in his organization that had cost him 3 shipments of pharmaceuticals in the last month. But his focus kept drifting to the new waitress. She was small, frail, even moving with a jagged, nervous energy that didn't fit the smooth, predatory rhythm of his club. Her name tag read Jen. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Her uniform, a standard black dress, seemed to hang off her frame, and she kept tugging at the long sleeves, pulling them down over her wrists, as if the fabric was the only thing holding her together. Boss. Salvatore. His second-in-command leaned in his voice, a low rumble. Senator Joyce is asking for a refill. Do you want me to send someone over, or should we let him sweat? Lorenzo didn't answer immediately. He watched as Jen lifted a heavy tray of crystal tumblers. Her arm trembled violently. A sheen of sweat slicked her pale forehead, making the stray strands of blonde hair stick to her skin. She took a step, swayed, and corrected herself. Let him sweat, Lorenzo murmured, taking a sip of his water. But keep an eye on the girl. The new hire. Salvatore glanced over. She looks like a stiff breeze would knock her over. Want me to fire her? No. Lorenzo's gaze narrowed. It wasn't just exhaustion. He knew the body language of pain. He knew how people moved when they had broken ribs taped up tight, or when their skin felt too tender to touch. She moved like she was made of glass that had already shattered, but hadn't fallen apart yet. Genevieve Parker was trying to breathe, but her lungs felt like they were filled with crushed concrete. The lights of the chandeliers overhead were too bright, stabbing into her migraine. Every noise, the clinking of ice, the roar of laughter from the table of investment bankers sounded like a gunshot. Just 2 more hours, she told herself, gripping the tray until her knuckles turned white. 2 more hours and I can go back to the shelter, if Brody hasn't found me yet. The thought of Brody sent a fresh spike of adrenaline through her veins, warring with the nausea. She had left him 3 days ago, slipping out the window while he passed out in a drunken stupor. She had taken nothing but the clothes on her back and the bruises he'd left as a parting gift. "Hey, sweetheart!" A booming voice cut through the haze. It was the man at table 4, a loud-mouthed real estate developer named Kenji. "We've been waiting 10 minutes for our bottle—" Genevieve flinched. I'm coming, sir," she whispered, her voice raspy. She turned too quickly. The room tilted. The floor seemed to drop away from her feet like a trap door. The heavy tray in her hand slipped as her grip failed. Time seemed to slow down. She waited for the crash of glass, the shouting, the inevitable firing. She waited for the impact of the floor. It never came. A hand large and incredibly warm clamped around her upper arm. It was a grip of steel halting her fall instantly. With his other hand, the man caught the tray, just inches before it tipped its contents onto the pristine carpet. Genevieve blinked, her vision tunneling into darkness. She looked up, expecting an angry manager. Instead, she found herself staring into eyes the color of a stormy sea. Lorenzo Moretti stood over her, his presence suffocating the space around them. The entire club seemed to go silent. He held the tray effortlessly in one hand and held her upright with the other. "Breathe," he commanded. It wasn't a suggestion. Genevieve tried. She gasped, her head lolling back. As she did, the long sleeve of her dress rode up. The makeup she had plastered over her wrist had rubbed off during the shift. Exposed under the harsh club lights were 4 distinct purple finger marks, bruises that wrapped around her delicate wrist bone. They were fresh, angry. Lorenzo's gaze dropped to her wrist. His eyes darkened, shifting from indifferent observer to something lethal. He saw the bruise. Then he looked at her neck, where the collar of her dress had shifted, revealing the yellowing edge of a choke mark. Genevieve's knees gave out completely. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the darkness finally claiming her. "Please don't let him find me." She went limp. Lorenzo scooped her up into his arms before she hit the ground, the tray forgotten on the table. Salvatore was at his side in a second. "Boss, what do we do?" Lorenzo looked down at the unconscious woman in his arms. She weighed nothing. She was a bird with broken wings, and she had just collapsed in the lion's den. "Clear the back room," Lorenzo said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "And get Dr. Evans. Now." Consciousness returned to Genevieve in slow, painful waves. The first thing she noticed was the smell. The stale alcohol and perfume of the club were gone, replaced by the scent of antiseptic and cedarwood. She wasn't on the floor. She was lying on something soft leather. A couch. Her eyes snapped open, panic instantly seizing her chest. She scrambled backward, her back hitting the armrest of a massive leather sofa. She was in a room she didn't recognize. It looked like a library or a high-end office. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a mahogany desk that cost more than her life's earnings, and rain lashing against a large window overlooking the Chicago skyline. "Easy," a voice said. Genevieve flinched, pulling her knees to her chest. Lorenzo Moretti was leaning against the edge of the mahogany desk, his arms crossed over his chest. He had discarded his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and ink. A breathless silence stretched between them. An older man with graying hair and a medical bag was packing up instruments on a side table. "Her vitals are low, Lorenzo," the doctor said, not looking up. "Severe dehydration, malnutrition, and signs of a concussion. And the trauma." Genevieve's hand flew to her neck. Her collar was unbuttoned slightly. Someone had examined her. "Who are you?" she croaked. "Where am I?" "I'm the man who owns the floor." "You almost cracked your head open on," Lorenzo said. His voice was deep, vibrating through the quiet room. He nodded to the doctor. "Thanks, Evans. Leave the pain meds." Dr. Evans nodded, gave Genevieve a sympathetic look, and exited the room, clicking the heavy oak door shut behind him. Now they were alone. Genevieve looked for an exit. The door was past him. The window was too high. She was trapped. "I need to go. I'm sorry about the shift. I quit. You don't have to pay me." She tried to stand, but her legs were jelly. She stumbled, and in 2 strides Lorenzo was there. He didn't grab her this time. He simply blocked her path, a human wall of immovable force. "Sit down," he said. "I have to go." "You have nowhere to go," Lorenzo countered brutally. "I checked your employee file while you were out. Address is a P.O. box. Emergency contact is blank. You have no coat, no purse, and $40 in your locker." Genevieve felt the blood drain from her face. "That's none of your business." "It became my business when you fainted in my arms," Lorenzo said. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. He reached out his hand, hovering near her face. Genevieve flinched violently, squeezing her eyes shut, expecting a blow. She waited. When nothing happened, she opened one eye. Lorenzo's hand was frozen in mid-air, inches from her cheek. His expression was unreadable, but his jaw was clenched so tight a muscle feathered in his cheek. He slowly lowered his hand, reaching instead for the hem of her sleeve. "Don't," she whispered. He ignored her. With gentle, terrifying precision, he pushed the black fabric up her arm, revealing the tapestry of violence etched into her skin. The finger marks on her wrist, the scraping burns on her elbows. Lorenzo stared at the marks for a long time. The silence in the room grew heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on Genevieve's arms stand up. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were no longer stormy. They were black pits. "Who hurt you?" he asked. The question hung in the air. It wasn't asked with pity. It was asked with the clinical detachment of an executioner asking for a name to put on a bullet. Genevieve shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "It doesn't matter." "It matters," Lorenzo said. He crouched down so he was eye level with her, forcing her to look at him. "Look at me, Jen. In this city, I am the thing that goes bump in the night. I am the reason people lock their doors. But you are sitting in my office bleeding on my couch." He reached out, and with his thumb gently wiped a tear from her cheek. The touch was shocking in its tenderness. "You said before you passed out, 'Don't let him find me.'" Lorenzo's voice dropped an octave. "Name him, and he will never find anyone ever again." Genevieve trembled. She wanted to tell him. God, she wanted to tell him. But she knew Brody. Brody Miller wasn't just an abusive ex. He was a detective in the 21st District. He had a badge. He had the law. And he had friends in low places. "He's a cop," she whispered, the confession tumbling out. "He's a cop, and if you touch him, he'll bring the whole department down on you." Lorenzo didn't flinch. If anything, the corner of his mouth twitched upward in a cold, humorless smile. "A cop," Lorenzo repeated. He stood up, walking back to his desk. He picked up his phone. "Well, that simplifies things." "Simplifies things." Genevieve stared at him. "He'll kill me. If he knows I'm here—" "He won't know you're here," Lorenzo said. He tapped a contact on his phone and put it to his ear. His eyes locked onto hers, burning with a promise of violence. "Salvatore, we have a pest control problem. Get the car and find out which precinct has a detective." He looked at her, waiting. Genevieve swallowed hard. "Miller. Brody Miller. Detective Brody Miller." Lorenzo finished into the phone. "I want to know where he sleeps, where he eats, and who he owes money to. Tonight." He hung up the phone and poured a glass of water, handing it to her. "Drink," he said. "You're staying here tonight." "I can't stay with you," she argued weakly. You're the mafia. Everyone knows who owns the Onyx." Lorenzo sat on the edge of the desk, crossing his ankles. "Yes, I am. Which means this building is the safest fortress in Chicago. No badge gets in here unless I allow it." He paused, his gaze softening, just a fraction. "You fell at my feet, Genevieve. By the ancient laws of my people, that makes you my responsibility. You don't leave this room until you're healed." Genevieve looked at the water glass, then at the man who radiated danger like a furnace radiates heat. For the first time in months, the terror in her gut subsided, replaced by something strange. Hope. Or maybe just the realization that she had traded a wolf for a dragon. Why? She asked softly. Why help me? Lorenzo looked out the window at the rain-slicked city. Because I hate bullies, he said quietly. And I hate broken things. Suddenly the heavy oak door burst open. Salvatore stood there, looking breathless, his face pale. "Boss," Salvatore said urgently, "we have a problem. There's a squad car downstairs. 2 officers. One of them is demanding to search the premises for a missing person." Genevieve dropped the glass. It shattered on the floor, water soaking into the expensive rug. "It's him," she gasped, shrinking back into the couch. "He found me." Lorenzo didn't look at the shattered glass. He stood up slowly, buttoning his cuffs. The transformation was instant. The attentive caretaker vanished, replaced by the capo, the boss. "Salvatore," Lorenzo said, walking toward the door. "Keep her here. Guard the door with your life." "Where are you going?" Genevieve cried out, terrified. Lorenzo stopped in the doorway. He looked back at her, and the look in his eyes was cold enough to freeze hell over. "I'm going to introduce myself to your boyfriend," Lorenzo said, "and I'm going to explain to him exactly who he just stole from." The Onyx Room was usually a sanctuary of hushed tones and clinking glass, but tonight the atmosphere in the lobby was jagged with tension. 2 uniformed officers stood near the entrance, hands resting on their holsters, looking uncomfortable. Between them stood Detective Brody Miller. He was a handsome man, in a conventional way. Square-jawed blonde hair, swept back a cheap suit that didn't quite fit his broad shoulders. But his eyes were bloodshot, and his jaw worked frantically, grinding his teeth. He looked like a man unraveling. "I know she's here." Brody spat at the head of security, a mountain of a man named Tiny. "She works here. I tracked her phone before she shut it off. Move aside or I'll arrest you for obstruction." "You don't have a warrant," Tiny rumbled, crossing his massive arms. "I have probable cause. She's a missing person, a danger to herself," Brody shouted, causing a group of patrons to scatter. "She's not missing." The voice didn't shout, but it cut through the noise like a razor through silk. The double doors to the inner club swung open, and Lorenzo Moretti stepped out. He moved with a languid, predatory grace, buttoning his suit jacket. He didn't look at the uniformed officers. He looked only at Brody. Brody stiffened. He knew who Lorenzo was. Everyone in Chicago knew. "Moretti." "Detective Miller," Lorenzo said, stopping 3 feet away. "You're upsetting my guests, and you're muddying my carpet." Brody sneered, stepping forward to bridge the gap, trying to use his height to intimidate. It was a mistake. Lorenzo didn't yield an inch. He simply stared back with eyes so void of emotion they were terrifying. "I'm here for my girlfriend," Brody said, his voice lowering to a growl. "Genevieve Parker. I know she's inside. She's mentally unstable. She ran off without her medication. I'm just here to take her home." Lorenzo tilted his head slightly. "Unstable. Is that how she got the bruises on her neck? Did she strangle herself in a fit of hysteria?" Brody's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "She falls. She gets confused. You don't know her like I do. Now step aside, Moretti. I am the law." Lorenzo laughed. It was a dry, dark sound. "In here, Detective, I am the law, and the girl isn't here. I saw her enter." Brody insisted, his hand twitching near his service weapon. "She quit," Lorenzo lied effortlessly, "about an hour ago. Walked out the back door, said she was leaving town. Maybe she finally realized she deserved better than a cop who hits women." Brody lunged. It was pure instinct, a flash of rage. He grabbed Lorenzo's lapel. In a split second, the dynamic of the room shifted. Before the uniformed officers could even gasp, Tiny had unholstered a gun, and 3 other security guards emerged from the shadows, weapons drawn. But Lorenzo didn't need them. He didn't even blink. He simply looked down at Brody's hand on his expensive Italian suit, then back up at Brody's face. "You have 5 seconds to remove your hand," Lorenzo whispered, "or I will remove the arm attached to it." Brody froze. He looked around. He was outgunned, outmanned, and in private territory. He released Lorenzo, smoothing his jacket with trembling hands. "You're making a mistake," Brody hissed, backing away. "She's not just some runaway Moretti. She stole something from me. Police property. Evidence. If you're harboring her, you're an accessory to a felony." Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but his mind raced. Stolen evidence. That changed things. It wasn't just domestic violence. Jen was a loose end. "Get it out," Lorenzo said. Brody glared at him, then signaled to the 2 uniforms. "Let's go. We'll be back with a warrant, and a SWAT team." "Bring them," Lorenzo called out as Brody reached the door. "My lawyers need the exercise." As the heavy doors slammed shut, Lorenzo's mask of indifference shattered. He turned to Tiny. "Lock this place down. No one comes in or out. And get the car ready. We're moving her to the tower." "The tower, boss." Tiny looked surprised. "You never take anyone there." "She's not just anyone anymore," Lorenzo muttered, striding back toward the office. "She's a witness." The tower was Lorenzo's private penthouse, located atop a residential skyscraper, 10 miles from the club. It was a fortress of glass and steel, accessible only by a private elevator that required a retinal scan. Genevieve sat on the edge of the massive, king-sized bed, wrapped in a silk robe Lorenzo had provided. The shower had washed away the grime of the streets, but she still felt dirty. She felt the phantom sensation of Brody's hands on her skin. She jumped when the door opened. Lorenzo walked in, carrying a tray of food, soup, bread, and tea. He placed it on the nightstand. "Eat," he said. "I'm not hungry." "I didn't ask." He sat in the armchair opposite the bed, watching her. "You need your strength. We have things to discuss." Genevieve took a tentative sip of the soup. It was warm, rich, and comforting. She hadn't realized how starving she was until the first spoonful hit her stomach. She ate quickly, then slowed down when she realized he was watching her every move. "Did he leave?" she asked quietly. "For now," Lorenzo said. "He claims you stole something. Police property." Genevieve dropped the spoon. It clattered into the bowl. She went pale. Lorenzo leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I can protect you from a violent ex-boyfriend, Jen. I can bury him in the desert if I have to. But I cannot fight a war I don't understand. What did you take?" Genevieve looked at him. He was a criminal, a mafia boss. But in the last 3 hours, he had shown her more kindness than Brody had in 3 years. She reached into the pocket of her discarded dress, which was folded on the chair, and pulled out a small black object. A USB drive. "I didn't mean to take it," she whispered, her voice trembling. 3 nights ago. He came home drunk. He was bragging. He said he was untouchable. He passed out, and his phone was unlocked. I saw a video. I sent it to my email and put it on this drive, then I deleted the email from his phone. "What's on the video?" Lorenzo asked, his voice low. "A murder," she said, tears spilling over. Brody met a man in an alley. They were arguing about money. The man said he was going to tell the chief everything. Brody, he shot him, point blank. Then he planted a gun on the body to make it look like self-defense. Lorenzo stood up and walked over to her. He held out his hand. She hesitated, then placed the drive in his palm. "Do you know who the man was?" Lorenzo asked. "No." She shook her head. "He was older, had a scar right here." She traced a line through her left eyebrow. Lorenzo froze, his hand closed tight around the USB drive, his knuckles turning white. The air in the room suddenly grew cold. "A scar through the left eyebrow." Lorenzo repeated his voice, sounding like it was coming from a great distance. "And he wore a silver ring on his pinky." Genevieve's eyes widened. "Yes. How did you know?" Lorenzo turned away from her, walking to the window. He looked out at the city lights, his reflection in the glass looking like a demon. "Because," Lorenzo said, his voice vibrating with a suppressed rage that made the windows rattle, "that was my father." The silence that followed was deafening. Genevieve gasped, her hand covering her mouth. "Your father," she whispered. "But..." "The news said Marco Moretti died of a heart attack." "That's what the police report said. That's what Brody Miller wrote in his report," Lorenzo said, turning back to face her. His eyes were blazing. "My father disappeared 6 months ago. His body was found in his car. No bullet wounds, but Brody must have staged it well." He looked at the USB drive in his hand, as if it were a holy relic. "You have the proof," he said. "You have the proof that a Chicago detective murdered the head of the Moretti family." He looked at Genevieve. He walked back to the bed and sat down beside her. The anger in his eyes faded, replaced by something intense and possessive. He reached out and cupped her face. His thumb brushed over the bruise on her cheekbone. "You didn't just save yourself by running to me," Lorenzo murmured. "You brought me the one thing I've been hunting for. Vengeance." Genevieve leaned into his touch, exhausted and overwhelmed. "What happens now?" "Now," Lorenzo said, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "The hunter becomes the prey. And you are never leaving my side. You are the most valuable thing in this city, Genevieve." He leaned in. For a second she thought he would kiss her. She wanted him to. She wanted to erase the memory of Brody with this dangerous, beautiful man. But he pulled back, pressing a kiss to her forehead instead. "Sleep," he commanded softly. "Tomorrow we go to war." 2 days passed in the tower. For Genevieve it was a strange limbo. She was a prisoner, yes, but a pampered one. Lorenzo was gone during the day, handling business, but he returned every evening. They ate dinner together. They talked. He told her about his childhood, about the burden of the Moretti name. She told him about her dreams of opening a bakery, dreams that Brody had laughed at and beaten out of her. A fragile bond was forming between them. It wasn't love yet, it was too sharp, too desperate for that. But it was a powerful alliance. Lorenzo treated her like a queen, and for the first time in her life, Genevieve felt safe. But safety in their world was an illusion. On the 3rd night, a storm was battering Chicago. Thunder rattled the glass walls of the penthouse. Lorenzo was in his study, reviewing the footage from the USB drive for the 100th time, planning his move against Brody and the corrupt precinct that backed him. Genevieve was in the kitchen making tea. She hummed a soft tune, feeling almost happy. Then the lights went out. The penthouse plunged into darkness. "Lorenzo!" she called out, freezing. "Get down!" Lorenzo's voice roared from the study. Crash! The glass of the balcony doors shattered inward as men in tactical gear rappelled down from the roof. Genevieve screamed, dropping the kettle. Red laser sights cut through the dusty air. Lorenzo emerged from the hallway, a gun in each hand. He fired bang, bang, and 2 of the intruders dropped. He moved with terrifying speed, sliding across the marble floor to take cover behind the kitchen island, where Genevieve was cowering. They cut the power, he hissed, checking his magazine. Security is down. Is it Brody? She cried, clutching his arm. Brody doesn't have the budget for this, Lorenzo said, grimly, peering over the counter. This is a hit squad. Mercenaries. Bullets shredded the kitchen cabinets above their heads, sending splinters of wood and china raining down. Lorenzo fired back his face a mask of concentration. We have to move, he said. The elevator is compromised. We have to use the service stairs. I can't, she sobbed, paralyzed by fear. Lorenzo grabbed her face, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were fierce in the darkness. Yes, you can. You survived him. You can survive this. I will not let them touch you. Do you hear me? I will burn this city to ash before I let them hurt you. He kissed her, then hard, desperate, and full of adrenaline. It was a promise sealed in blood and gunpowder. On 3, he said, pulling away. Run for the door. Don't look back. 1, 2, 3. They sprinted. Bullets whizzed past them, shattering vases and embedding in the walls. Lorenzo shielded her body with his own firing behind him to suppress the attackers. They burst into the hallway and into the stairwell, the heavy fire door slamming shut behind them. Lorenzo jammed a metal bar through the handle, locking it. He turned to her, breathing hard. There was a dark stain spreading on his white shirt just above his ribs. You're hit, Genevieve gasped, reaching for him. It's a graze, he lied, though his face was pale. Come on, we have to get to the street. They descended the stairs, flight after flight. But as they reached the lobby level, Lorenzo stopped. He held up a hand. Wait. Through the crack in the door, they could see the lobby. It wasn't the police. It wasn't mercenaries. Standing in the center of the lobby, surrounded by armed men, was a man in a pristine white suit. He was older, with silver hair and a cruel smile. Uncle Sal, Lorenzo whispered, shock coloring his tone for the first time. It was Salvatore, his second in command, the man who had been at his side for 10 years. Find them, Salvatore shouted to his men. Brody promised me the territory if we hand over the girl and the drive. Kill Lorenzo. Bring me the girl alive. Genevieve felt the world spin. The betrayal was absolute. Brody hadn't just come for her. He had made a deal with the devil. He had turned Lorenzo's own family against him. Lorenzo looked at Genevieve. He looked at the blood on his side. He looked at the army waiting in the lobby. We can't go out that way, he said, his voice deadly calm. Where do we go? Genevieve asked, tears streaming down her face. Lorenzo took her hand, squeezing it tight. The garage, he said. We take the Ducati, and we drive like hell. The roar of the Ducati engine echoed like a beast screaming in the concrete throat of the parking garage. Lorenzo kicked the bike into gear, the machine vibrating violently between his legs. He pulled Genevieve tight against his back. Hold on, he gritted out, blood leaking warm and sticky down his side, soaking into the waistband of his trousers. Do not let go, no matter what. I won't, Genevieve cried, burying her face in the leather of his jacket. She could smell the metallic tang of his blood, mixing with the exhaust fumes. Lorenzo gunned the throttle. The tires squealed, smoking against the polished concrete. At the far end of the garage, the service door burst open. Salvatore's men poured in, weapons raised. He's making a run for it. Shoot the tires, someone screamed. Lorenzo didn't hesitate. He didn't aim for the exit ramp. He aimed for the gap between 2 parked SUVs. He twisted the throttle, and the bike surged forward, a black missile in the dim light. Pop, pop, pop! Bullets sparked against the pavement and pinged off the metal of the cars. Genevieve screamed as the side mirror of the bike shattered, showering her shoulder with glass. Keep your head down, Lorenzo roared. He swerved, banking the heavy bike hard to the left, drifting around a concrete pillar. The exit gate was ahead, a heavy iron bar blocking the way. There was no time to swipe a card, no time to stop. "Brace yourself." Lorenzo shifted his weight. He didn't slow down. He accelerated. The bike hit the wooden arm of the gate at 60 miles per hour. The wood splintered with a deafening crack flying into the air. The impact jarred their bones, and the bike wobbled terrifyingly, fishtailing on the slick asphalt of the street outside. But Lorenzo held it steady. His arms, corded with strain, forced the machine back into a straight line. They shot out onto the rainy Chicago streets, merging into the late-night traffic. Behind them, the wail of sirens joined the chaos. Not police sirens, Salvatore's black SUVs. "They're following us," Genevieve shouted over the wind. "I know," Lorenzo shouted back. His vision was blurring at the edges. The adrenaline that had sustained him in the penthouse was fading, replaced by the cold, heavy drag of blood loss. The bullet hadn't just grazed him. It was lodged somewhere deep near his ribs. Every bump in the road felt like a knife twisting in his gut. He wove through traffic, running red lights, cutting across lanes. The SUVs were heavy, clumsy. They couldn't match the agility of the Ducati. Lorenzo took a sharp right into an alleyway, narrowly missing a dumpster, then a sharp left, navigating the labyrinth of the industrial district. He drove for 20 minutes, putting distance between them and the hunters, until the city skyline was just a glowing memory in the rearview mirror. He slowed the bike as they approached an abandoned shipyard on the river's edge. It was a desolate place of rusted cranes and rotting warehouses. He steered the bike into the open maw of a derelict hangar and killed the engine. Silence crashed down on them heavier than the noise. "Lorenzo." Genevieve slid off the back of the bike. Her legs were shaking so hard she could barely stand. Lorenzo tried to kick the stand down, but his foot slipped. The bike tipped over, crashing to the concrete floor. Lorenzo went with it, tumbling awkwardly onto his side. "Lorenzo!" Genevieve scrambled to him, falling to her knees in the dust. He was pale, deadly pale. His lips had a blue tint. The entire left center of his white shirt was a saturated crimson ruin. "My pocket," he wheezed, his eyes fluttering shut. "Phone. Call. Dominic." "Who is Dominic?" She panicked, patting his pockets with blood-slicked hands. "The only one left," Lorenzo gasped. A cough racked his body, bringing up a speck of blood to his lips. "Tell him. The shipyard. Tell him. Code Black." Genevieve found the phone. It was cracked, but working. She scrolled frantically through the contacts until she found Dominic. She hit dial. "Yeah, boss." A gruff voice answered on the first ring. "It's not the boss," Genevieve sobbed. "It's Genevieve. He's shot. We're at the shipyard. He said Code Black." "Please, there's so much blood." There was a pause on the other end, a sharp intake of breath. "I'm 5 minutes out. Keep pressure on the wound. Do not let him sleep." The line went dead. Genevieve dropped the phone and tore the hem of her dress. She folded the fabric into a thick pad and pressed it hard against the hole in Lorenzo's side. Lorenzo groaned, his body arching in pain. His eyes snapped open, hazy and unfocused. "I'm sorry," she whispered, leaning over him, her tears falling onto his face. "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. You should have just let me fall in the club." Lorenzo reached up. His hand was heavy, his grip weak, but he found her hand pressing on his wound and covered it with his own. "No," he rasped. "Best thing I ever caught." "Don't talk like that," she scolded, her voice breaking. "You're going to be fine." You're the mafia boss, remember? You're the monster in the dark. Monsters don't die in dusty warehouses. Lorenzo managed a weak, crooked smile. Jen, what if I don't make it? Shut up, she yelled at him, pressing harder. You are making it the drive, he insisted, his voice fading to a whisper. Give it to the feds. Burn. Salvatore. Burn. Brody. We'll burn them together, she vowed. She leaned down, pressing her forehead against his clammy temple. Stay with me, Lorenzo. Please. I can't do this without you. He looked at her, really looked at her, through the haze of pain. In the dim light of the moon, filtering through the broken roof, he saw the strength in her jaw, the fire in her eyes. The broken girl from the club was gone. In her place was a woman forged in steel. You can, he whispered, his eyes sliding shut. You're stronger than you think. Lorenzo, open your eyes. Headlights swept across the hangar walls. Tires crunched on gravel. Car doors slammed. Genevieve grabbed Lorenzo's gun from the floor. She stood up, standing over his unconscious body, pointing the weapon at the entrance with shaking hands. She didn't know if it was Dominic or Salvatore. But she knew one thing. The only way they were getting to Lorenzo was over her dead body. A massive figure stepped into the light. It wasn't Salvatore. It was a man with a thick beard and tattoos up his neck. He raised his hands. I'm Dominic, he said calmly, seeing the gun. I'm here to help. Genevieve didn't lower the gun. Prove it. Dominic smiled grimly. Lorenzo hates strawberry ice cream. He's allergic to cats, and he owes me $50 from a poker game in 2018. Genevieve lowered the gun, her knees finally giving out. Help him. Please. The underground clinic was a place of cold metal and hushed urgency, buried deep beneath the foundation of an old veterinary practice in the industrial district. The air smelled of rubbing alcohol and damp earth, a stark contrast to the luxury of the Onyx Room or the sterile heights of the tower. Genevieve sat in a hard plastic chair, her hand wrapped tightly around Lorenzo's. He was alive, but the victory felt hollow. His face, usually so commanding and sharp, was slack and pale against the thin pillow. The steady, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only thing tethering her to sanity. The surgery to remove the bullet near his ribs had been successful, but the blood loss had been catastrophic. He was currently in a medically induced coma, a sleeping dragon forced to rest so his body could knit itself back together. She looked at the USB drive sitting on the metal tray table next to a bottle of saline. It was such a small thing, a piece of black plastic no bigger than her thumb. Yet it held the weight of a kingdom. It contained the evidence that could burn Brody Miller and Salvatore to the ground. But evidence was useless if you were dead. Genevieve closed her eyes, and the image of Lorenzo crashing the Ducati, shielding her body with his own, replayed in her mind like a jagged loop. He had gone to war for her. He had taken a bullet meant for her. For years she had been the victim, the runaway, the girl who flinched at loud noises. But looking at the man who had risked everything to become her shield. Something inside Genevieve fractured and reformed. The fear didn't vanish, but it hardened. It crystallized into something cold and sharp. Defending isn't enough, she realized, her grip on his hand tightening. As long as we are hiding, we are losing. She stood up, her legs trembling, not from weakness, but from the adrenaline of a decision made. She smoothed the wrinkles of her torn, blood-stained dress, then leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to Lorenzo's cool forehead. I won't let you down, she whispered into the silence. She walked out of the recovery room, and into the small, dimly lit waiting area. Dominic was there sitting on a crate, stripping down a Glock 19 with methodical, terrifying precision. He looked up as she entered his eyes, dark and unreadable. "How is he?" Dominic asked, his voice a low rumble. "He's fighting," Genevieve said. She stood tall, squaring her shoulders. "But we can't just wait here, Dominic. Salvatore knows we're wounded. He'll tear the city apart until he finds this place." Dominic reassembled the slide of the gun with a sharp click. "We have safe houses. We can move him." "No," Genevieve said. The word hung in the air, absolute and final. "No more running. I'm done running." She walked over to the table where Dominic had laid out a map of the city. She placed her hands on the surface, leaning in. "I need a favor," she said. Her voice was ice-cold, devoid of the hesitation that had plagued her for years. Dominic raised a thick eyebrow, studying her face. He saw the change. The terrified girl from the club was gone. In her place was a woman forged in the fire of the last 48 hours. "Name it." "I need you to get a message to Salvatore and Brody," she said. "Tell them I'm ready to negotiate." Dominic paused, his hands stilled on the weapon. "You want to talk to them?" "That's suicide." "No," Genevieve corrected him, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, calculating light. "I don't want to talk. I want to surrender." The meeting was set for midnight at the Onyx Room. The club, usually a pulsating heart of music and laughter, was now a mausoleum. The neon lights were killed, leaving only the amber emergency lights to cast long, skeletal shadows across the velvet booths and the crystal chandeliers. The air was stale, stripped of perfume, and expensive scotch smelling only of dust and anticipation. Detective Brody Miller sat in the center booth, Lorenzo's booth. He had his feet propped up on the mahogany table, a glass of Lorenzo's private reserve whiskey in his hand. He looked triumphant, the king of a stolen castle. Beside him sat Salvatore, looking smug but restless, his eyes darting to the shadows. 10 of their most loyal soldiers stood around the perimeter of the room, weapons drawn, creating a cage of steel and muscle. "She's late," Salvatore grumbled, checking his watch. "Maybe she got smart and ran." "She didn't run," Brody said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "She has nowhere to go. She's broken Sal. I broke her a long time ago. She'll come crawling back." As if summoned by his arrogance, the heavy double doors at the entrance creaked open. The sound echoed through the silent cavern of the club. Every gun in the room trained on the entrance. Genevieve Parker walked in alone. She had found a change of clothes at the clinic, a simple, stark white dress that seemed to glow in the dim light. It was the color of surrender of a sacrificial lamb. Her hair was pulled back, exposing her neck, and her hands were raised clearly above her head. In her right hand, clutched tight, was the black USB drive. She walked with a slow, deliberate cadence. Click, click, click. Her heels on the marble floor sounded like the ticking of a clock. "Well, well," Brody sneered, dropping his feet from the table and standing up. He adjusted his jacket, a predator sighting easy prey. "Look who finally came home." Genevieve stopped in the exact center of the room, standing on the spot where she had fainted into Lorenzo's arms just days ago. She looked small, surrounded by the armed men, but she didn't flinch. "Where is he?" Salvatore demanded, stepping out from behind the booth. "Where is Moretti?" Genevieve's breath hitched. She forced tears into her eyes, letting her lip tremble. "Dead?" She lied. Her voice broke perfectly. "He died in the warehouse. Your men, they hit an artery. There was nothing I could do." A heavy silence fell over the room, followed immediately by a bark of laughter from Salvatore. Finally, the traitor breathed, his shoulders relaxing. The throne is mine. Brody ignored Salvatore. He walked toward Genevieve, his eyes hungry and cruel. He stopped just inches from her, invading her space, smelling the fear on her, or what he thought was fear. "And you?" Brody asked, his voice dropping to a mock, sympathetic whisper. "Did you realize you have nowhere else to go? Did you finally realize you belong to me?" Genevieve looked up at him. She saw the madness in his eyes, the absolute conviction that he was untouchable. "I realized I was tired of running, Brody," she said softly. "I have the drive. I want to make a deal." "A deal?" Brody threw his head back and laughed. It was an ugly sound that bounced off the walls. "You don't have any leverage, Jen. I own the police. Salvatore owns the streets. You are nothing without Moretti." "I want immunity," she persisted, her voice rising slightly. "And I want safe passage out of the city. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." "Hand it over," Brody commanded, holding out his palm. "And maybe I won't kill you right here." Genevieve hesitated. She looked at the drive in her hand, then back at Brody. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the final gambit. "Did you really kill Marco Moretti?" she asked, her voice loud and clear, projecting to the back of the room. Brody rolled his eyes, exasperated. "Are we doing this now? You need a confession for your peace of mind." He stepped closer, gripping her chin with his free hand, forcing her to look at him. "Yes, Jen. I put a bullet in the old man's head because he wouldn't pay my increase in protection fees. I killed him, I framed it as a heart attack, and I planted the evidence, and I'd do it again. Now give me the damn drive." Genevieve stared at him for a heartbeat. Then a smile slowly spread across her face. It wasn't the smile of a victim. It was the smile of the executioner pulling the lever. "Okay," she said. She tossed the drive to him. It sailed through the air in a slow arc. Brody caught it, grinning like a wolf who had just cornered the lamb. "Smart girl," he said, pocketing the drive. He reached for her arm, his grip bruising. "Now let's go home. I have a lot of punishment to catch up on." "Actually," Genevieve said, taking a sharp step back, pulling her arm from his grasp, "I don't think we're going anywhere." Brody frowned. "What?" Suddenly, the massive LED screen behind the main bar, usually reserved for sports events or music videos, flickered to life. Static hissed through the room's sound system, followed by a sharp whine of feedback. Brody spun around. His blood turned to ice. On the massive screen was a live video feed of the room they were standing in. The angle was high, captured by a hidden security camera in the rafters, and in the bottom corner of the screen, a view count was ticking up rapidly. 234 viewers. "What is this?" Salvatore shouted, backing away. "It's a live stream!" Genevieve said, her voice ringing out with terrifying clarity. "Direct to the Chicago Tribune's Facebook page, the DOJ Watchdog Group, and the FBI tip line." Brody stared at the screen, his mouth agape. He saw himself. He heard his own voice echoing on a 10-second delay loop, booming through the club's speakers. "Yes, Jen. I put a bullet in the old man's head." The confession. It was out. It was everywhere. "You bitch!" Brody screamed, his face twisting into a mask of pure rage. He reached for his service weapon. "I'll kill you." He never cleared the holster. Crack! A single gunshot rang out from the shadows of the upper VIP balcony. It was a precise, thunderous sound that stopped the world. Brody screamed, clutching his hand. Blood sprayed onto the pristine marble floor. His gun clattered uselessly away, skidding under a table. "I told you," a deep, gravelly voice boomed from the darkness above. "If you touch her, I'll remove the arm." Salvatore spun around, his face draining of color. "It's a ghost," he shrieked. "He's dead." She said he was dead. From the shadows of the balcony, a figure emerged. Lorenzo Moretti leaned heavily against the railing. He was pale sweat sheening his forehead, and his black shirt was bulky with bandages, but he was upright. He held a long-range rifle with the ease of a master. "I improvised," Lorenzo called down, his voice strained but commanding. "Dominic!" "Now!" Lorenzo shouted. The kitchen doors burst open with a crash. Dominic led a charge of 20 men loyalists who had been in hiding waiting for the call. They poured into the room like a flood. It wasn't a fight. It was a massacre of will. Salvatore's mercenaries, realizing they were outgunned, their leader exposed and their crimes broadcasting live to the world, dropped their weapons instantly. Salvatore tried to run for the back exit, scrambling like a rat. Tiny, the massive head of security, stepped out from behind a velvet curtain. He didn't even use a weapon. He simply extended a clothesline arm. Salvatore hit the floor with a sickening crunch and stayed there. Brody was on his knees, cradling his shattered hand, staring up at the screen that was ruining his life in real time. He was sobbing not from pain, but from the realization that his badge, his power, and his freedom were gone. Lorenzo handed the rifle to a guard and began the slow, painful descent down the spiral staircase. The room fell into a reverent silence. He walked past his men, past the cowering Salvatore, straight to Genevieve. He stopped in front of her. He looked at the white dress now stark against the chaos around them. He saw the fire in her eyes, a fire he had helped kindle. "You said you were dead," he murmured, a hint of amusement warring with the pain in his eyes. "I had to make them believe it," she whispered, her facade finally cracking. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her trembling. "I had to be the bait." Lorenzo reached out with his good arm and pulled her into his chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the scent of her. He was warm, solid, and alive. "You're crazy," he breathed against her skin. "Walking in here alone, baiting them like that." "I learned from the best," she sobbed, clutching the fabric of his shirt. Lorenzo turned to face the room, keeping one arm possessively around her waist. He looked at Brody, who was weeping on the floor as sirens began to wail in the distance, real police sirens this time, the FBI. "Get them out of my sight," Lorenzo commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Tie them up for the feds. Leave the recording running. Let the world see them beg." He looked down at Genevieve, lifting her chin with his thumb. "It's over," he said softly. "The wolf is in a cage, and the traitor is broken." "And us?" Genevieve asked, searching his eyes. Lorenzo kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was searing, possessive acclaim staked in blood and victory. It tasted of survival. When he finally pulled away, he rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "We," he said, "are just getting started. Welcome to the family, Genevieve." What an ending. Genevieve didn't just survive. She became the queen of the chessboard. It's rare to see a character transformation that intense, from a trembling waitress to a woman who takes down a corrupt detective on a live stream. If your heart was racing during that motorcycle chase, or if you cheered when Lorenzo stepped out of the shadows on the balcony, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button. It tells YouTube you want more intense, high-stakes drama like this. And listen, if you want to know what happens next, how Genevieve handles running the city alongside Lorenzo, or If Brody tries to strike back from prison, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon. I have a darker, even more twisted story coming next week about a billionaire who buys a woman's debt, and you do not want to miss it. Share this video with a friend who loves a mafia romance with a happy ending. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.